Hey, John. Hey,
Hello.
Dimitra.
Nick,
Hello.
Dimitra is here. All right. All right. We have a very special guest with us today. We have Dimitra Fimi. I always call her Dimitra, and so this is rough for me, but it's long romantic eyes. Fimi. Dimitra Fimi is the professor of fantasy and children's literature at the University of Glasgow and the co-director of the Center for Fantasy and the Fantastic. And they always like to say this is the first university chair in the UK that has fantasy in its title. And I want to talk to her about that. We have so many things to talk to you about, Dimitra. All right, her books. Her Tolkien Race and Cultural History won the Mythopoeic Scholarship Award for Inkling Studies, and she co-edited the critical edition of Tolkien's The Secret Vice, which won the Tolkien Society Award for Best Book. Her Celtic Myth and Contemporary Children's Fantasy won the Mythopoeic Scholarship Award in Myth and Fantasy Studies, and was runner-up for the Catherine Briggs Folklore Award. Other work includes her co-editing Subcreating Arda, World Building in J.R. Tolkien's work, its precursors and its legacies, and her Imagining the Celtic Past in Modern Fantasy. You know she's serious. Any title that has Arda in the title, this means that you are clearly you speak Elvish if you know what Arda is about. Anyway, she has contributed articles for the Times Literary Supplement and The Conversation, has appeared on numerous radio and TV programs. She's on the go-to list for BBC Wales, which I love. We're going to talk about that. All right. When the rightly famous and beloved The Great Courses series decided to offer a Lord of the Rings entry for their catalog, the very best in scholarship for adult learners, they asked Dimitra to create the world of J.R. Tolkien, one of their most popular courses that you can enjoy in an Audible edition. I highly recommend it. Welcome, Dimitra. I can't tell you how excited Nick and I are to have you here. In fact, I've told you this several times as we've been warming up for this show, but thank you for joining us today. I can't wait.
Thanks
to
for
talk to you
having me.
about all these things.
It's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to a discussion.
Go
ahead.
Noswaith Croesio, Professor Fimi. I'm wearing my Welsh shirt in honor. We actually won a rugby game yesterday against
my husband was watching.
the great rugby playing nation of Japan. We're still celebrating. So you are from the Greek island of Salamis. You are currently a professor at the ancient University of Glasgow. So what brought you to Cardiff Metropolitan University?
Oh, that's a long story. So yes, I am from Salamis, which is the island where Euripides was from as well, and very close to Athens. This is, of course, most people will know the big battle, the big sea fight of Salamis, which is after the Marathon battle. So nice sort of classical links there for you. I suppose I grew up reading classical mythology from a very young age. I'm also, from a small island where there's still sort of living folklore. There's still, stories are still circulating, folk rituals or customs, etc., etc. So I was always interested in that. And I suppose there came a point where I knew the classical world inside out. And then I discovered Tolkien sort of by mistake when I was doing my undergraduate degree at Athens. And I think that was the entry point was how does one person does all of this, all of this sort of mythological create all this mythological structure that feels as, as complete or, well, maybe not complete, but as complex as real world mythologies do. And I started looking into what sort of mythological material he was using, and I went into Germanic stuff, and then I suddenly realized that there's a whole untapped thing on the Celtic sources that not very much, at least back then, had been done on at all. So I was looking to sort of do a master's in some other mythological traditions, so not the Greek, not the Greek and Latin, which I knew pretty well, and Celtic seemed like, the untapped resource, and of course then you start looking at which programs will do Celtic studies as a master's, and a lot of them do, but a lot of them want you to have a Celtic language beforehand. So I looked at Dublin, I looked at all sorts, and at that point I needed either Irish or Welsh before I even started. Well, Cardiff University would allow you to do it whilst learning at the same time, so that was sort of that's what made the decision of Wales and Cardiff Uni, where I did my master's, and then I continued with my PhD on Tolkien. So that's how I ended up. That's how I ended up in Wales. And then of course you learn all of that tradition and you realize it's all over the place in modern fantasy as well. And yeah, and after my PhD, I got the position at Cardiff Metropolitan University, which is a slightly younger university in Wales. And the job opened in Glasgow. Is it now 7 years, 7 or 8 years I've been up here? So that was the first ever job on first ever lectureship on fantasy and children's literature opened, and I was like, this is for me, this is mine. I'm going for it. And it was a big decision, because my husband is from Cardiff, he's and all his, we still go quite a lot because my in-laws are there and his sister and all that, and it was a big thing. I was like, look, if you're ready to move, because our son was quite young then. I'll go for it. But if we're not sure about this, I'm not even going for it, because I think there's a good chance I'm going to be offered this, and I don't want to be in this situation where we don't know what we're doing. But he was very supportive all for it, and it all worked. It all worked all right in the end. So I've ended up from one, I suppose, Celtic speaking country to another. I did try a bit with Scotch Gaelic. I have an understanding of how to read Irish, but I'm not, I can't claim I can speak much at all. With Welsh, I had got to the point where I could hold a conversation and listen to the news and that sort of stuff, but I don't think I would ever be fluent, because I started, quite late in life, I suppose. All the research says, to become fluent, you need to have started earlier. But yeah, and I'm worried I'm losing some of it. But then I was in Cardiff a few weeks ago, and it was fine. I was thinking, okay, I remember a lot more than I thought. Yeah, so it's a very.
Really, Dimitra, you're hilarious. I have two daughters who live in Greece, as you know, and they've been there 10 years. They're fluent in Greek. But every time I talk to them about this, and we laugh. First of all, they start laughing, like, "Look at me, I'm speaking in English," And then, but they say, no, Dad, we're not fluent in Greek. We have these horrible American accents, and we can never, get rid of these American accents. Greeks all look at us sideways. You're these women in, the outfit, and they have American accents, which doesn't the Greek mind doesn't accept that. Really, that's just too weird. But you don't have a Greek accent at all.
Well, I think it's because I'm lucky in the sense that my mum is an English and French language teacher, so I started very young.
What is with this picture? All right.
Yeah, I don't know. I started quite young. I suppose I know too much about also, I suppose, the whole British folklore and context, because I was I lived in the house of my mum ran her own sort of language school, so there was all this educational material. We read the Ladybird books as young children. There's a cassette of me speaking, saying stuff in English when I was like 4 or 5 or something silly. So, but that is multilingualism in Greece is not unusual. We're a country that relies a lot on tourism. People pay, to have private lessons and educate themselves in languages, because so much of our economy relies on being able to do this. So I think there was a good background there, I suppose.
So for our American watchers, Ladybird books were small hardback books costing 5 shillings or 25p, and they were a distillation of British culture as we would have liked it to have been.
Yes, exactly. Not necessarily how it was.
Yeah.
It is true. I was reading from the age of 3, and I didn't know anything about Ladybird books. I never read Enid Blyton. I didn't know Enid Blyton until I was in my 40s.
Yeah.
Not the time you want to read Enid Blyton. But anyway, that what a different world you all come from than my
I read C.S. Lewis in Greek long before I discovered Tolkien. C.S. Lewis was translated. The Narnia books were translated in Greek and did really, really well. But they never translated The Last Battle, so I had to wait until I could read enough in the original.
The secret book.
I know.
Secret text, All right. All of our Rowling Studies people are like, I'm glad you all are having a great time. Yeah. Okay. Dimitra, you're a Tolkien scholar, and you're expert in fantasy and children's literature. But Tolkienistas are that's a Harry Potter fandom word. Tolkienistas are legend for looking down their ent noses at Harry Potter. Though there are important exceptions to that rule. Stratford Caldecott, of blessed memory, his wife Leonie, Amy Sturgis, you know a lot of these people. How did you meet The Boy Who Lived, and what were your first impressions of Rowling as an author?
I suppose it was the same way that most British people heard about it, was word of mouth, and that's something we forget. We forget that the whole industry sort of backing or sort of advertising didn't happen until the books were well established. So I just heard other people's children talking about it. I think actually my mother-in-law in her book club read the book. And then, I read the first, I think at that point we were already at book 4. So I sort of read the first 4 in one go, and then got hooked. My husband read them as well and got hooked. And he doesn't read fantasy. He reads like Le Carré and completely different things, but he got completely hooked as well. And then, it was just waiting for the next book and reading them together. And so, buying 2 books and reading to each other so that none of us would go ahead of the other and, could know what happened first and all of that. I suppose the first few books, my first impression was, these feel quite traditional in many ways. They're built on the school story, which is an institution in children's literature in Britain and goes back to the sort of 19th century. But and they're quite light-hearted and there's a lot of humor there, which is actually a tough thing to do when you're writing serious fantasy, right? It's there's an interesting balance there, and then they started getting more and more like the sort of fantasy I knew from Tolkien, where the big themes started unfolding and the darker sort of themes and the big struggle, the big sort of existential stuff. And by that point, you're immersed in the world. By that point, you're also quite interested. Well, you're invested in the characters. But at that point, I was also interested in all sorts of things. I remember the theories about do we have an Atreus sort of story there, or a Perseus story? Will Voldemort end up being Harry's grandfather? I remember sort of seeing all sorts of possibilities there. But for me, I think that the point where I realize that these are quite profound, profound books with, which are worth that will last a long time, I suppose. Was when we got towards the end, that scene at King's Cross with Dumbledore, and is it all happening or is it in my head? Of course, it's in your head, but why does that mean it's not true? This is the moment, that I think it was the point of no return for me. It was like, okay, this is important stuff. And I think after reading the last book, I went back and reread back to back the beginning of the first, and I could see the seeds of what was really important at the end, right there at the beginning. And again, you get a sense of, all right, this has been planned a long time before. There's a lot of important structural work that's happened right from the beginning, when there was no guarantee that the series would even take off. You're just going blind, thinking about how the industries and how these sorts of things are. So yeah, I've enjoyed them, and I've taught the books many times. And I love the classical mythological stuff. I like sort of going through all of this. I like using, I like the whole Latin for spells, and the accusative, and the amount of times I've used the expecto patronum spell to explain nominative and accusative in Latin, and why it's patronus, but in the spell you have patronum. It's there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
All right, I want to get into, one of the reasons I'm really excited about your being here is that you have a lot in common with Rowling, right? I mean, you're a Tolkien devotee, so is she. I mean, you're a scholar. She's one of the host of great amateur lovers of Tolkien. You're a serious student of mythology. That's your job, and so is she. I mean, it just permeates her work. You have a wonderful appreciation of the magic of story, especially magical stories for children. This Tolkien influence on Rowling is well documented. She's really trying to, for the last 20 years, she's been backpedaling from it, but it's obvious in her work. And she before she became famous, she was talking about it. But her use of myths as templates for her stories is less well known than the Tolkien influence, but I think it's at least as important. What do you make of her admittedly, she calls it her shameless borrowing from folktales and myths? I mean, when Nick and I talk about the intentional shed artistry of her work, and we talk about there's 7 main tools. The one that's the most neglected in the series until recent tweets has been mythology. You're the myth lady, Dimitra. What? And she's into the Greek myths, I think, as at least as much as she is into the Celtic myth, and probably more so.
Sure.
Yeah. What do you make of all that?
Well, I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of. It's the fantasy literature is in some ways a continuation of the way that myth and folklore work. These are stories that have survived for a long time for a good reason. They're versatile stories. They can be told and retold, and they mean sometimes, the very same thing, which is a fundamental human thing, and sometimes they have enough sort of variation in them to mean different things for different generations. So most, scholars of fantasy today would agree with me, I think, that fantasy has its roots in myth and folklore. It is part of the DNA of the genre or the mode, because we talk about fantasy as a genre, which is like the structural thing where you have expectations and certain plot points that you expect. But there's also fantasy as a mode, which is any text that isn't strict realism, right? I mean, isn't Midsummer Night's Dream fantasy? Come on.
Yeah.
So in that respect, it's there's nothing to be ashamed of. This always has been the tradition of fantasy, and I don't see that as an extractive thing where the author goes back and sort of mines a tradition for material. I see it more of more as a chain, as a tradition, interlinked chains, I suppose. Folklore itself, we're talking about myths, and straight away we have to talk about versions of myths, and different variations of myths. There is no such a thing as the archetypical or original myth. There might have been at some point, but very rarely do we get a sense of that. We get bits and pieces, including in iconography, not just in text. And in some ways, fantasy is another chain in that tradition of retelling stories that mean something important, and then continuing that tradition. You could think about it as the rebirth of something very old, especially as a reaction to the realist novel, which becomes a very dominant mode in the 18th and 19th centuries. In some ways you could see this also 19th century sort of focus on folklore as a discipline, which becomes a something you study. So I don't see a problem there at all, and I don't think, and the whole point about folklore is there is no such thing as originality. Everything has been said before. It's about how you're going to say it, what twist are you going to use, how are you going to utilize the story that we all know. That's the same with ancient tragedy. I try to explain that to my students. People in ancient Athens would see a tragedy. They knew the story. They knew the story already. The main template of the story was there. It was all about how you were going to, how were you going to give a twist to the characters? What will you do with some bits of the story that you could still manipulate? It's the same thing. I don't think there's anything, shameless about it at all.
And go ahead, Nick.
I love the thought that actually, in terms of your parallel with Rowling, of course, Rowling almost certainly came upon T.H. White and Lewis and Tolkien first, and then really got to dig into mythology at Exeter afterwards. So she would have seen those reflections from the literature first, and then to the mythology. Now, John has been really a lone figure in the wilderness, which is not unusual for John, in terms of looking at the mythological component of the Cormoran Strike series.
Sure. Yeah.
Right up until a few weeks ago, when J.K. Rowling tweeted a wonderful painting
I know.
of Cupid and Psyche.
Which completely, all I was thinking at that point was, I was thinking about John's thesis, which I had the pleasure to examine a couple of years ago. And I was thinking, there it is. Yeah.
Well, I was in the middle of work. I think John was in the middle of work. I had to phone him immediately as soon as I saw that tweet come up. But yeah,
Mm.
that was very gratifying. So John's talked about Leader and the Swan, of course, because we have leader strike. Castor and Pollux, Cupid and Psyche,
Yeah.
of course, Artemis.
Mm.
Um, and John, you're going to have to pronounce this next one because I always pronounce it incorrectly.
You want me to say it so Dimitra can correct me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Tisiphone.
Persephone, yeah.
Okay.
Persephone, the rape of Persephone, Persephone and Hades, yes?
Tisiphone is a.
Oh, okay.
Tisiphone
How do you
is
spell that? Give me a sec. How do you spell that?
Yeah, I'm not going to give it to you in Greek. It's Tisifo PH.
Yeah, Tisiphone. I would say in Greek, I would say Tisiphone, but it is Tisiphone. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm so glad my daughters are nuns and they won't watch this. This is great. They won't be doing that. Oh, yeah. My father can't pronounce anything in Greek. You should know. I was a classics major, but all of my Greek is Erasmian Greek. So
yes,
it's just only embarrassing when I speak to people who know Greek. Anyway, Tisiphone, Strike refers to himself, I think, in the first book as Tisiphone the Avenger.
One of the Erineas. Again, I'm not sure how to say it in English. I would say Erineas for the Furies.
The Fates. The Furies.
The Furies.
And that, and in the Running Grave book, a character that we don't like, the head of the Universal Humanitarian Church, describes Rob and Ellicott as Artemis, and it fits.
It does fit. It does fit really well, and it fits better now that we know about her. We know that she probably can't have children. Do you know what I mean? That also fits quite nicely, and there is the strangeness of Artemis being a virgin goddess, but also being a protector of children, childbirth, and all of that fits very nicely.
That was the other time Nick called me during the day. He doesn't usually. Our times are just enough off that we don't talk except for at this juncture, that we're both in now. It is that when I saw her being tagged as Artemis and it fitting all these things about what Artemis is, and then she dropped the hint that she had chlamydia from the rape. I said, "Oh, she's going to have complications from the chlamydia, and she's going to be sterile." And everybody, in Strike fandom was just roll their eyeballs about, "Oh, there goes John, off on his mythology thing," and I was like, "This is so clear to me." And I got no response to that other than a few eyeball rolls and stuff. But even better, Dimitri, when it came out, in chapter 3 of this book, nobody said anything except for us. Nick and I were doing the hey, we got it. It's kind of rough to be,
I think
cheering about ectopic pregnancy, but
To be fair, we've just had an episode of the Strike Ellicott Files podcast came out at the weekend. They've reviewed up to chapter 3 of the new book in their deep dive. You get full credit for that.
Oh, well, there you go. That's great.
Weirdly,
well, then edit this out, Nick.
Prescient.
I have no relationship with them anyway. Don't let me dig myself any deeper into that hole.
Yeah. To be honest, I don't think I had. I knew that the Strike books were out for a long time, obviously, and I was still sort of teaching and working on the Harry Potter stuff, and I didn't read them for a while. And then I'm just trying to remember now, because I like a good detective story, right? I do like my Agatha Christie, and I do like sort of, often sort of I spend my reading for pleasure rather than my my sort of scholarly reading. And sometimes actually you can get a bit bogged down with all of this. There comes a point when you're like, I'm reading too much for work, and this is now bad for my soul. I just need to read just to read. And I had a feeling that she'd be really good at detective fiction, because in some ways the Harry Potter books are also detective fiction.
Yeah.
We get clues, and we get a resolution, and we get Harry is one of those it's the ideal detective, right? The outsider who, has a different perspective and can see things that others can't see, which works perfectly with both Strike and Robin as well. And I think what happened is, did my husband and I first, I think, saw the adaptation of the first book, and then I thought, okay, I need to read those. Obviously, I need to read those, especially with the mention of Leda. I was thinking,
Yeah.
okay, what is going on here? And I think at the point where I had John's thesis, I was nearly up to date, and then I rushed to read, make sure I had read everything up to that point so that I could read the thesis. And that's the point where I read The Christmas Pig as well, which I had neglected. So yeah, it wasn't it was part of my fun reading, I suppose, and then you start noticing all sorts of things, and of course, again, getting very invested in the characters. I don't know. I was also getting slight vibes of, and again, that's something I've been rewatching with my husband and son recently. X-Files vibes. The difference between the character who maybe wants to believe and the character who doesn't, but they start convincing each other and sort of moving towards a closer an alignment in some ways. And that's where I think I started picking up Gothic elements as well. But I think the Harry Potter books have Gothic elements in them too. You can read Strike as a Byronic hero, no problem at all. That's quite an interesting way of thinking about it.
The Gothic thing in Harry Potter, I once got, I thought, I had to explore the Gothic a little bit, especially after Order of the Phoenix. And so I got a book on elements in Gothic literature, and they had like 47 points. Yeah, about chambers and
and dungeons,
houses and ghosts and all the things you're going to see in Gothic literature. Yeah. And it says if you have any more than 10 of these, you can qualify the book as Gothic. And Rowling had 45 of the 47.
That's nearly everything.
I mean, that's more parody than it is. And she's just piling it on. Oh,
absolutely.
And this latest book starts out that same way. We're traveling on a road to a house, and it's shutters are broken and spider webs. We know there are ghosts. Now you've mentioned my thesis twice, so I need to do the big reveal that I actually know Dimitra Fimi because she was the exterior reader on my PhD thesis at Swansea. And how did I, a cart boy at an Oklahoma City grocery store, have Dimitra Fimi decide to sign up to be my exterior reader? This is the pantheon of Tolford. Well, I did a podcast with a wonderful woman and scholar, Sarah Brown, in the UK about literary alchemy in Tolkien and his work. And we had a wonderful conversation. She's a delightful woman and mind-blowing what she did with Tolkien's work in alchemy. And she, of course, it was one of these moments where she was fangirling me about literary alchemy, and I was just doing I don't believe this is happening. But anyway, I was at the point where my thesis advisors were saying we've got to get an exterior reader, John, and it should be somebody in the UK. And I go, oh, well, I know all the people in the UK. They're going to be able to help me with that. And I asked Sarah, Dr. Brown, who she recommended, who would be sympathetic to that kind of reading. And she says, I know. you've got to talk to Dimitra Fimi. And I was like, huh? Right, I would if Stratford Caldecott was still alive. I'd have Stratford call her, but this is too much of a stretch. So anyway, my thesis advisor contacted you because I'm not supposed to contact you, and
no, all of that has to happen at another level. Yeah.
But the best part of that story is that my thesis advisor told me, Don, don't mention any of the work you've ever done. They don't know you're the dean of Harry Potter scholars and this, that, and the other thing. And so they had me strip everything out of my thesis that I'd ever mentioned before. And they wanted it in a formalist paradigm rather than what I really do. And so I get to the Viva, and Dimitra says, John, what have you done with this thesis? There's nothing in here of your stuff. And my thesis advisor's in the other room doing that. Oh my God.
What have I done?
She knows who he is, you know.
Well, of course we do. It's a small world, you know. I think we all know of each other's work, and I think nowadays there is definitely an encouragement to, you know, for people to publish before their thesis and to you know to continue that work. I don't think I think in older times there was this fear about, you know, not sort of interfering with a thesis, but a thesis is a step in a longer process. It's not an, you know, a completely separate thing that you do and then you close it off and put it in a box. It's, you know.
Well, anyway, you saved me on several levels. One, the corrections and notes you gave me were really what saved me. But that the thesis had Cormoran Strike in it. It was largely a Troubled Blood and Christmas Pig thesis with Harry Potter touches, and that when I thought Nick and I were talking about, you know, who can invite on the show, and I was just like, oh, I've got to ask Dimitra if she'll be on the show because she gets all of this. That's what I want to ask you is, we've been talking about Rowling and the mythology, and you've seen Rowling's recent confirmation of the Cupid and Psyche myth in her tweeted painting of Psyche Ascendant. That suggests that we're going to see the happy ending of that myth, Cupid and Psyche, in Strikes 9 and 10. What did you see of that?
I worry a bit, to be completely honest. Yeah, I do worry a bit because the version of the story that has stuck with me the most is a bit ambivalent. You know, it's like, you know, she sleeps this eternal sleep and then she's woken up and taken to, you know, that apotheosis sort of moment, which is usually when the myths end and, you know, somebody's died and then they've taken them off to become a constellation or whatever it is. And I don't like that very much. I'm just thinking, please do not sort of, you know, give her a big tragic death and then she becomes a, you know, a hero post. I don't want to see that, please. Yeah, I'm worried. I'm worried because that marriage element of the Cupid and Psyche, or Eros and Psyche, as I would say, myth is not straightforward. It happens at a different level, doesn't it? It's not on Earth. It's of a different sphere. So that I think she's given us something to be hopeful about, but at the same time, I don't know.
Well, there's actually two weddings, isn't there? There's two weddings to the same people, but for the first time, Psyche doesn't realize who she's marrying.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah. But well, that I suppose we've gone past that point now, haven't we? You know, this whole idea of her not, you know, not knowing who he is, or trying to find out who he is, or hearing, you know, misinformation about who he is. I think we've probably gone past this, and it hasn't been, you know, it hasn't been interpreted as a marriage, but more as a partnership, as a union. That's why I'm reading that at the moment. And I do so want a happy ending, but at the same time, will she do that, or will she go for something slightly more challenging? I don't know. I don't want the challenging, but I can see why, as an author, you might want to push the boundaries.
I want to. We've been corresponding via Substack and other things because Dimitra has her own Substack page, and that will definitely be down below for you all to do that. Yeah, look down below, and you want to stay in touch with what Dimitra is doing. One of our correspondents in the moderator Bach channels at Hogwarts Professor was appalled that when Robin hears about Bijou or hears about Candy and these things that are being said about Strike as basically a John that hires prostitutes or something, it's just this abuser of women, and she has her doubts. She says to herself, you know, and this correspondent, who shall not be named, said, "Oh, come on." You know, she's been with this guy through thick and thin. They've been battling death. He pulled her off the train tracks. Is this an abuser of women? And I thought, yeah, that is pretty odd. And then I was back and forth with you, and you said, "Oh, John, that's
Well,
You made some comment like, as you know, John, and I was just like, oh yeah, as I know, it's a myth thing.
because it bothered me as well, I suppose, and I stopped there and I was thinking, why is she even contemplating this? That doesn't work. And then I was thinking, wait a minute, it isn't the whole sort of plot line of her trying to see him with a lamp, and sort of burning his arm and all that, isn't that because her sisters keep on trying to convince her that he's a monster, that you don't know what's you have a completely wrong understanding of him, that that there's something here there you don't know about, right? And then suddenly I was thinking, okay, that probably makes sense now. This is like a nod to that element of the story in which you could potentially be led to believe something that in your gut isn't right. So yeah, I was thinking this is the moment of the jealous sisters.
And of course, her conscience mind is trying to reconcile the fact that
Yeah,
she knows she's in love with Murphy.
yeah. And she's trying to do
While
that all the way
while
through.
her subconscious is battling that, she's suffering PTSD. I mean, honestly,
Mm.
this whole book, Robin's
Oh, she's having
Robin's
a very
in
hard
trouble.
time, isn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
She's a student of psychology, and um, she's the soul in an absolute flux here.
Yeah,
And the core conflict that we've been talking about a lot at Hogwarts Professor is eros and anteros.
Mm,
That
mm,
that
mm.
and she gets that, I think, through C.S. Lewis and his love of Spencer and her own love of Spencer, because
Yeah,
that permeates Fairy Queen, this eros anteros
absolutely.
distinction.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that in this book. Nick and I just did a ring analysis of the first part, the first 13 chapters, and the turn is chapter 7, of course, and that seventh chapter features Robin in conversation with Kim Cochran, who is clearly the erotic figure
Yeah.
of the book and represents kind of the suppressed feminine sexuality that Robin is. Obviously she's a woman, she's sexually active, all of that, but it's not her identity. She's very uncomfortable with people that identify with that. And so she certainly repressed that around Strike. She doesn't flaunt that. She's not bending over to show cleavage to Strike. I mean, that's just that part of their identity is with Artemis and Tisiphone. They're the Avengers, and they're the truth seekers. And that's anti-erotic. That's a selfless love of the truth for others. Well, this series is largely turning on that, and Robin's schizophrenia. She's really having to come to terms with her. She has a vocation. Her interior logos, if you will, is the word that's calling her from within is that Artemis identity.
Yeah.
And yet she's a human being. She's a woman human being. And so we have this real agony and conflict. My question for you about this in mythology is a lot of that's literary. She's getting that from the thing, but isn't a lot of that sort of the Jungian psychological approach to this myth? I mean, the Jungian school really owns Cupid and Psyche, or Eros and Psyche. This is their paradigm of feminine sexuality. So we see Robin with the sisters, doing the Strike is this, that, and the other thing. And I mean, Ilsa is the first one. Strike even calls Ilsa, the Great Sisterhood Grievance Committee or whatever about him. And then we see, Bijou and Candy and people, and Nina LaSalle's, that all of these women sort of whispering in her ear that Strike is a abuser of women and a monster. And that she has to come to terms with this by saying no. This is sort of the message of what the tower and the myth tells Psyche that she has to do going to hell. She has to not be a woman. She has to not be nurturing and caring. She has to say no in order to have her identity be real rather than just sort of a biological influence. Anyway, I love we're going to see that. I think certainly we're going to have this Jungian crone come in the next
Oh
book and
yes,
say,
oh yes, we have a
yeah,
yeah,
a
the therapist.
sweary
Mm.
psychologist. Very much looking forward to her.
and she's going to say basically, drop Murphy and strike. Don't talk to men.
Yeah.
Or she's going to be kidnapped and disappear. We may find out that she's disappeared and gone off to Prudence's house. I love just the sort of the Pilgrim's Progress quality.
Yeah,
Robin
the
Robin
naming.
retreats to the house of Prudence. I'm like, oh, okay, that's
I
pretty
mean,
transparent.
I think that's a big thing that's underestimated generally in Rowling is her nomenclature. You know, the choice of names throughout all of her work. But that's a whole other. Yeah. But that's interesting.
Every couple of weeks, we say we need to do a names episode. We need to do a names episode.
Yeah, because you're not going to do it, Nick. It's going to fall on me to do the names thing. You're going to ask me great questions. Whoa, okay. I see how this works.
But I was
you were saying, Dimitra.
I've just been thinking about this Artemis link for a while, since running Grave, and this whole, you were saying now about her, her having to somehow, create that identity for herself, which isn't necessarily sexual. It's more towards sort of, and that fits quite nicely with the Artemis paradigm. But and I was thinking, is there any example where Artemis falls in love? And there is the one story which is mostly known from classical tragedy, and that's the Phaedra story, Hippolytus. When Hippolytus is a follower of he's vouched to be chaste and he's following Artemis, but his stepmother desires him and accuses him of rape. And then his father Theseus ends up sort of cursing him, and Poseidon steps in, and Hippolytus is killed, as some sort of revenge for something he hasn't done, right? And that's the point where we see Artemis sort of grieving as if she's grieving for a lover. She never quite, it's never quite said in those terms. But I don't know. There's something interesting here in terms of having the virgin goddess grieving for a male follower who's also about to be chased. So this whole Antares thing, I don't know. I'm just processing still all of this. But it's not unheard of to have Artemis in that position of, grieving for a man.
Fascinating.
But that's the only example I could think of, because she's, usually quite harsh and difficult.
When you pointed out that the celebrations, because Rowling put that thing up saying, here's what you have to look forward to, Psyche and Cupid ascendant. And you point out that, well, life on Mount Olympus is not life on Earth. That this is post-mortem. This is, and the Robin and Strike, more obviously than Cupid and Psyche, though most people missed it, is Castor and Pollux.
Yes,
she's the great driver, and he's the boxer. And they're more like brother and sister than they are like, obviously like lovers. And that story doesn't end well.
No, that doesn't at all. We have another constellation situation.
That's right. That's right. And it has a connection with Leda and the Swan because of the bizarre, double twins and stuff. But that, I'm just thinking, gosh.
Helen and Clytemnestra on that side of things, don't we? And again, there's something interesting there about the two female models we get with those two women, because one famously, one of course is the cause of the Trojan War because of her beauty, because of her sort of sexual desirability, but the other one ends up being the avenger, sort of really she goes to heinous sort of criminal behavior, but this is really revenge for her daughter. So all sorts of interesting things there as well. And we've seen a lot of that desire for revenge, or avenging, maybe not quite revenge, when really horrible things have happened, and either parents or children taking things in their own hands. We'll see. All of
right.
This is, that's the fun of this, though, isn't it? That we don't know yet. In a year's time, 2 years' time, we'll be saying possibly very different things.
Yeah, it depends on what she tweets next week.
I know, there's that as well.
I mean, this is something that people that are in Tolkien scholarship don't have to deal with.
No.
We don't have,
Well, there's still stuff that come up every now and then. New letter sort of comes up, or some sort of. Yeah, I mean, I didn't. We were working with Tolkien's manuscripts for a secret advice for his essay about language invention, and there was stuff in there I wasn't expecting to find. So there's always a possibility that something's going to surface, but not in that live sort of situation.
Well, it would be as if you had the Tolkien diary dump. All of a sudden we got Tolkien's diaries. You would experience what the Rowling world is like, of just, oh my goodness, we've just been given all this information we never expected to see in our lifetimes. Anyway, I'm going to take a detour here, because another thing that you mentioned in our correspondence is that Running Grave, Strike 7, has another embedded text, which is not a myth per se, though it definitely has mythic elements to it. One that makes sense in light of Rowling's love of everything the Bronte sisters wrote. Tell us what made you think of Jane Eyre as you were reading Strike 8.
So as I said earlier, I've always been thinking.
Excuse me, Strike 7.
Yeah. I've always been thinking of Strike as a bit of a Byronic hero, right? And I'm going by the more sort of traditional. I had it somewhere here to read it out. Yeah, the Lord Macaulay sort of description, that a man proud, moody, cynical, with defiance on his brow and misery in his heart, a scorner of his kind, implacable in revenge, yet capable of deep and strong affection. That's a pretty good description.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good description.
There's nothing in there about a leg, though. Where's the leg?
No, that's true.
You got everything else, but no leg. I mean,
because that's Byron, and he's too narcissistic for that. Anyway, that's a that's a whole other story. So I've been thinking about sort of Gothic resonances and Strike in that respect, and then I sort of forgot about it, and it was probably somewhere there in the back of my mind. But I think for me, the moment that brought Jane Eyre to mind was when Robin is in the attic with a sick child, with his mother, who's clearly gone. Her mind has turned, and just after that point is when she feels that Strike is there, and there's no logic to this. It's just not. There's nothing rational about it. She just knows he's there, and he is there, right? And to me, that straight away brought to mind the point where Rochester is calling for Jane from miles and miles away. The tree has fallen, all of that sort of stuff, and she hears him, and she answers back, and he hears her response, and that's of a huge huge space. And that point, where the two lovers across space somehow know, and they can communicate with each other. That's sort of, in Bronte studies, sometimes it's been called as a telepathy moment, right? I don't like it very much, because I think it's more profound than that. In some ways. It's not a pseudoscientific term in any way, but that brought that to me. And then I thought, wait a minute, she was just in an attic with a woman whose mind has turned. So the whole mad woman and the attic point of Jane Eyre. And Jane Eyre is full of, as a novel itself, is full of folkloric references, specifically, of the area, the moors, and the gigantic dog, the sort of. It's actually not that far from the Harry Potter. The
Grimm.
The Grimm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a version of the Grimm story. And Rochester calls her an elf, or or a fairy. There's all of those folkloric resonances there. So yeah, that to me was like, okay, this sounds like a maybe not conscious, but somewhere subconsciously there, that text is in the background. Is part of the what Tolkien calls the leaf mold of the mind. Of the writer, where things are sort of, think about composting, right? And things are together and sort of slowly decomposing and creating something new out of that.
You know enough about alchemy and literary alchemy that, I mean, what we've made of that scene before. You had before I read your thing, and someone on our comment threads came to the same conclusion. This is Jane Eyre. I was like, oh wow, okay. It's in the air right now. Everybody of Insight is seeing this except for me. But she's just come out of the box, which
yes.
Is, I don't know if it's some people make it
a lowest point, probably, yeah. Yeah.
They're going to do a Skinner reference or something like that, but she literally dissolves inside the box. I mean, she's not outside herself when she comes out of the box. She's terrified, and she's terrified of going back in the box. But as you know, at a specific stage in alchemy, the queen dies inside a grave, usually a coffin, which of course is a box, and rises out of that to the soul uniting with the spirit at that point.
Yeah.
And so here she rises from the box and goes up into the attic and sees this child, helpless child, and a unhinged mother who's been tortured because of its relationship with the child. And then she hears Strike, who is in the Shakespearean romance of Strike and Ellicott is a soul and spirit conjunction, and having totally been stripped of her identity inside the box, and in a way it's a purified soul, then she has her conjunction with Strike, much as she does that on Christmas Day in Hallmark Man, where she comes unglued and goes into the bathroom, which is a place of exteriorization. If there's any other place in your house is for exteriorization, there it is. And she breaks down in the bathroom and opens up the gifts and says to herself, "I love him." She really has that, and she texts him immediately, with kisses and all sorts of stuff. But of course, she crawls back into the box.
That's the thing. My husband is nearly done with the Hallmark Man now, because he's taken his time. This time I just went really, really fast, and he's at that point where he's like, "Oh, she's gonna go back to Ryan effing Murphy, and this is not good, and I can't deal with it. She's gonna be a people pleaser." And I was like, "Yeah, well," and I can't say anything. I just have to shut up and wait for him to finish.
But I think both those interpretations are right. I'd be interested to know about the Bronte sisters and how much they knew about relatively occult elements. And we know that it's like Tale of Two Cities is basically an alchemical novel with its three parts being straightforward, Negretto, Albedo, Ribetto, and I just wonder how much. And we know in the American, the transcendentalists are really involved in that type of reading and writing. The Bronte sisters, I've never seen that work. It's that's not something I've done any kind of research in, which is shameful as a Harry Potter guy or a Rowling guy, because when you name your film studios after this woman, maybe you should do more than count on your comics memory of the Bronte sisters. But
I mean, we have a lot of archival stuff on the Brontes, or most of it at the Parsonage. And I mean, again, I know the stuff that tends to be relevant to what I'm doing. So I've read a lot of the Juvenilia, for example, this whole world building they did with their toys, with their toy soldiers, and writing little books for them and creating a whole world for them and creating sort of documents, etc., etc. Because the next book I'm working on is on miniature fantasies. So children's fantasies where we have tiny people, little worlds, sort of hidden away, in the natural world or in domestic settings. So I haven't really looked into, beyond the juvenile sort of stories and Angry and Gondel and all of these sort of new worlds they've created. That's the term for that for children is paracosms. It's when children play and they create play worlds, which is more or less how Narnia starts, as Boxland between Lewis and his brother. But I would be surprised if there wasn't any resonance of that. If you think about the time and what other literary people were doing and the sort of aspiration of the whole family. This is a very creative family. It's not, it's not. I mean, we don't, they didn't survive long enough to sort of, all of them at least, to have a whole oeuvre. But it would be interesting to see, what is there in the parsonage that could make a link to those sorts of things. I might keep an eye out actually next time I have a look.
Well, I'm looking through my questions here. This is great. Things to ask, Dimitri. This is great. I've actually got objects here to show to the screen here. This for this question here. Rowling did something unusual in 2019. Well, among the unusual things that she did that year, her Annus Horribilis, whatever, in inviting readers to interpret her work in light of their lake inspiration, as well as her intentional shed artistry. Writers like Lewis and Tolkien would be aghast at a writer inviting that kind of interpretation, though Inkling studies today necessarily include heavy biographical leanings in almost everything written about those authors. What is your take in general on what Lewis called the personal heresy, and about Rowling as a living author inviting that critical perspective while she's still among us? I mean, and my props here are Humphrey Carpenter and Thomas
The official
Shipley's biographies of Tolkien, and as landmark as Carpenter's biography was in 1977, it was written 4 years after Tolkien died.
Yeah, very, very soon after, yeah.
So, well, again, it's post-mortem. He's not there to refute it or to discuss it. But Carpenter and Shippey, you told me today, both knew Tolkien.
Shippey was taught by Tolkien, yeah.
Wow. I know that Lewis hated the idea of reading books through a biographical lens or filter. What was Tolkien of the same mind on that? And what do you make as a person who, here's an author inviting you to look at their unresolved psychological issues and to read their work through that? I mean, is that crazy?
It's unorthodox. I wouldn't say it's crazy. I think there is always that recognition that that element is there. There's not much you can do about it. We're human beings, and writers are equally human beings, and they live lives in the real world, and that feeds into the creation. I suppose in academic circles, we've gone in swings and roundabouts. There are schools of thought that say, no, you don't look at that, you don't touch it, like the formalist school, where you just look at the text and the text will tell you by itself. But then you also have cultural history or cultural studies, which is more of the paradigm I come from, where I am interested in actually what Tolkien had read. It's important for me to know that he knew a particular text or he didn't know a particular text. I don't necessarily, though, take him at his word. So, he contradicts himself a number of times. So he'll say in one letter, I did this, and he'll say in another letter, I did that. And the two can't be, it's not possible that both are right. And to me, so I would say that the biographical element has to be taken with caution, a lot of caution, because there's such a thing as a biographical legend, right? And that's the concept of the author trying to, work with this tricky thing that is human memory, which is not, infallible. It's, you're telling a story about your life, and often you're making up a story about your life, whether you want to do so or not. In which you devise an explanation of why you did something that you did. How easy is it to go back to that pivotal moment that a particular idea came to you, and can you really capture it? Can we really go? We can't time travel. We can't go back in the past. And if you think about sort of current research on how memory works, it is a storytelling event. It is a reconceptualization and trying to reconfigure the past. So I think that the example I've used with my students sometimes is how sometimes Rowling has contradicted herself about where the idea of the Harry Potter books came to her. Was it the train trip? Was it the cafe in Edinburgh? Was that the house she lived in at the time? That can't be all three, but maybe it was all three. But elements of the story came at different times. These things are not. It's only in retrospect that we recognize those moments, right? Or in retrospect that we realize, that's what I was doing then. I was responding to that particular thing. So yeah, the authors themselves have to narrativize what happened, and often that comes at points where they are quite annoyed because they're asked by journalists again and again and again the same thing, and you end up with a situation where you have told a story several times. It's not quite right, but you've come to believe that it is right because it's become part of your identity and your understanding of yourself as a creator. So I did a lecture a couple of years ago on Tolkien through interviews and reminiscences. Tolkien gave quite a few interviews in his later years, and he said things that previous writings contradict. And And at times he would say the same thing to journalists, to the point of having the phrase exactly word by word, and sort of reproducing it on demand, sort of thing. And that's not a normal way of, this is sort of being put on the spot and having a script to use. And the script becomes a story, and the story is not, the story is a story. The story can become something else. So I have no problem with criticism using biographical stuff, as long as there is this recognition that it's shifting sand. It's never going to be exactly reliable, exactly right. And that's not because Tom Shippey said, like, again, famously, authors lie. Tom has a very particular way of talking, which is quite direct. And I'm thinking, I don't think they lie knowingly. I think at times they contradict themselves because they are in the spotlight, because they are, especially somebody who, like Rowling or Tolkien, who became very famous in their lifetime, and they were bombarded with questions all the time. It's part of the process of understanding your own creative practice and your own journey. Can try and go back and write, what you now think was a pivotal moment in your life, and then do it again in 10 years' time. You'll probably write it differently. That's
I mean, Rowling is a person who's had. She invites us to interpret her work in light of their inspiration, and yet does not provide us with what that inspiration was. So she says it's her core beliefs, it's her unresolved psychological issues, etc. in that interview, and she's talked about Lake and Shed 3 times, I think, at some length. And the question then for people in Rowling studies has to be, okay, so what was the inspiration for Harry Potter? What gives us that? I mean, as you said, she talks about her compost pile of books that she's read. Okay, there's that. There are core beliefs that we know about, from feminism to her spiritual, not religious Christianity, sort of esoteric Christianity. But what are the unresolved psychological issues? What caused the crisis that gives us Harry Potter? Outside of the world of Hogwarts professor, that's almost a taboo area. People don't want to talk about that because there's not anywhere to go. I mean, her friends.
That's the problem, isn't it? It's like I suppose you could work backwards, and you can do it as you've done, John. You look at the fiction itself, and you try to make inferences out of that. But you will never get, unless there is a conscious decision to give us that evidence. That it just isn't there. It just isn't there. And I'm just thinking, I'm just wondering whether there is an autobiography in progress that we will see at some point, or whether there is an autobiography with a particular what's the word, with a particular instruction to release after she's gone. There's all sorts of things there, and obviously there are real people whose lives will be impacted by whatever is being revealed there. It's a tough one. I was saying before we started about Tolkien's diaries, which exist, but nobody has seen apart from Humphrey Carpenter back at the when he was writing the biography. And even now, a good few generations after Tolkien's gone, there will be revelations in there that might impact upon people whom he knew, or do you know what I mean? It just gets very, very complicated.
Yeah,
and there are. I mean, for me, that's an ethical question as well, isn't it? It's how far do we go when we don't have, when the author is happy to provide the raw material, I think that's fine. That's where the door is open. It's how far can we go with speculation?
Because she gives the invitation and says, this is how my work has to be understood in terms of my method, Lake and Shed. That could just be she's read enough critical biographies, and just answer your aside there. Yes, there are rumors that there's a critical biography in progress.
I was wondering about that.
And that's, you'd expect that, given that there's so much unknown about her past other than what she's shared. And there's large holes in her biography. Where was I going, Nick? That
But
Just
I
a
think
moment.
I
Just a
think
moment.
we've got enough there to work with. We've got enough on the techniques, and we've got enough on the motifs, and the traditions and the mythological templates. Do we need that information? I don't know.
the writer I think about, I think she lives in the north of Scotland, but she was originally from Australia, and she and a friend murdered one of their mothers, brutally murdered them when they were teenagers. They were both imprisoned, and then they were released after some period of time on the conditions that they would never contact each other, and that they have new identities. And they both did, and they've never contacted each other since that anybody knows of. Well, one of them has become a very famous writer of detective fiction,
Right.
under a different name, converted to Mormonism, and
Okay.
for many years nobody knew that she had murdered somebody.
Yeah.
And yet her main detective is a character that's haunted by this horrible event in his past, and
Yeah.
has repressed memories about it and such. And when a reporter was looking to find out trying to find what happened to these two young girls, years after this murder, which was the big event in Australia of the decade or whatever, that they found it. And here's this woman that is now a famous writer, and she writes stories that are largely projections. And she has a pretty deep lake. She's got issues to draw from that inspire her stories. And now I've read a lot of her work, and I can't read anything she writes and not say, oh well, I know where that comes from. The Rowling thing is, as we've talked about, there's golden threads. There's pregnancy traps. There's dead children. There's grieving parents. It's in everything she writes.
Yeah.
And if then you go back and look at her feminist beliefs, which are a lot like the anti-feminist feminist school of Camille Paglia and Germaine Greer, if you take that, if you make the steps and say, okay, what if Rowling did a pregnancy trap on her boyfriend Michael, and it didn't work out, and she had an abortion, and then she regretted it? It was she uses mother's love as her go-to reference for the love of Christ inside her books. It's sacrificial, unconditional love is a mother's love, and that that's why you have all these women that are grieving for their children, because it's like they just broke their entire nature by murdering or neglecting their child. Now, that runs through everything she writes. If you then take that lens, if you do the unethical, speculative, crazy thing and say, okay, let's just say she sprang a pregnancy trap, it didn't work out, she killed the child because she wanted to be a writer. And that, just like that character in The Silkworm says, Michael Fancourt, there are no great authors who are mothers. And that she's really talking about herself, that she believed that. And so, and then of course she becomes a single mother and becomes the most famous writer on the planet, which this has to be a mind crusher, right? It's just like, oh wow, so much for that idea.
But I think,
and then if you take the only value in that is either Daily Mail gossip, rag sheets, or it informs the text and gives you a different perspective on it. Yeah. And sure enough, every book in Harry Potter has something which is interior, which has to be exteriorized and eliminated, and it's all for the good. Well, that's an abortion apologetic. And so you have these books that are profoundly Christian on one count, and I think I can say that. I wrote those books. And yet have an abortion apologetic embedded in them. Now that changes almost everyone's reading of Harry Potter. To see that, if that was the agony that gives us Harry Potter.
But can we ever say that it was one thing? That's the only thing I was going to pick up here. There's too much complexity to just be able to pin it all down to one event. Or the death of her mother obviously had a huge effect. on her.
But the mother wasn't dead. The mother wasn't dead when Harry Potter, the inspiration comes.
Yeah,
Not
the
for the
beginning of it,
inspiration.
yes.
Not for
Yeah.
the inspiration, but for the bulk of the work. And she said it has absolutely informed what I'm writing for Harry Potter. The golden threads are valuable insofar as they are golden threads. And we can see this reflected again and again and again. And we can speculate as to why that's happening, as long as we're really clear. This is based on absolutely zero non-textual evidence.
Yeah.
Because Rowling, however she's managed it, that middle period of Rowling's life, that people knew her and were around her and talked to her, and she has friends, and she's remained with many of those friendships, absolutely do not talk about it.
It's difficult because I was also thinking about the Robin's agony in this last book over the ectopic pregnancy, which she didn't even know was, exist. She didn't even know that there was a pregnancy there at all until it all goes wrong. And the grieving for for obviously an unplanned pregnancy, where she hasn't taken any decision to terminate or anything like that. This is it just happens. But at the same time, so on one hand, I was wondering, that was an interesting thing. I did not expect her to get quite, traumatized in this way and sort of grieve for a child that there was never any intention of having, and also with somebody who's not necessarily her soulmate, in the way that, we've seen her expressing herself. But at the same time, that is a plot solution to a difficult problem. And the difficult problem is, we know we want her to be with Strike. We know Strike doesn't want any children. We know she wants to remain a detective forever and continue sort of solving cases. But there's still that residue of the expectation that she will at some point have family. And that solves that, in a very tragic and poignant and, horrible way. But it solves that problem. I'm wondering, how much of that is setting up things for what's to come.
Yeah,
that's very cynical. That's a very cynical way of thinking.
If we were just reading the Strike series, that that makes perfect sense. It brings us to where we want to go in a way. But when you see that we have situations like that in everything that she's written throughout the story, then it's like,
a preoccupation. Wow. Yeah, definitely.
So, and we have the bizarre comments that she makes that don't really seem to sync with what at least what the popular understanding what pro-choice feminists are like. And Rowling has declared herself to be a woman that's in favor of legal abortions. Or no, Nick's ready to stop me here. She has never said she's in favor of abortion. She is in favor of their being legal.
Safe legal abortions are available. Yeah. That's what she's in favor of.
Which is not a pro-choice position per se. There's a scene in Hallmark Man where Ryan F. Murphy is I don't know, his conversation, he becomes such an unsympathetic figure inside this book. Yes, all his conversations with Robin are just like, you want to strangle this guy.
I know.
What's wrong with you? Anyway, but he's basically saying to her, would you have kept the baby? Would you have, did you want the baby and all these things? And she's like, wow, really? I get to answer these questions? And finally she says, of course I'm grieving for this child, What's the exact phrase, Nick? Where she says, I'm not inhuman.
I cried for this child. Yeah.
But she makes specifically, she says it would be, she phrases it in a way to suggest that not to grieve the death of a child in your fallopian tubes would be inhuman.
Inhuman. Thinking, that's the phrase.
Thinking, wow, if there's any pregnancy that one could say, there's no way this child comes to term. And if it grows to a certain size, you're going to die of sepsis if nothing else, unless you get immediate attention. How and you're going to grieve for that child?
Yeah, but
that's a remarkable position for at least the cartoon feminists that many of us have in our heads that are just like, abortion until, in Japan, abortion is legal until the child draws breath. And so they murder children at birth. And that, that's sort of the archetypal, evil feminist abortionist. I think this Rowling's idea of abortion is you still grieve for a child a fallopian tube child. That's and if you don't, you're inhuman. You're not a human being. That's a remarkably conflicted
it's an embodied
position.
experience, though, and I think we forget that it's child loss is, it's not just it's I haven't experienced this obviously, but I've had many friends and students and colleagues who've gone through this, and it rips apart you bodily as well as sort of, as well as psychologically. It's a very difficult thing.
Yeah.
It's a very, very difficult thing. And even if you sort of rationalize it, on one level, you can never rationalize it. It's an embodied experience.
And we know she's got a close friend who has written about her own infertility, not by choice.
Yes.
And she's used that as an empowering experience, but it's very clear in her writing that, when it happens, that loss, the loss of that potential, even though she had never really considered having children, the loss of that
but I can see that
potential.
it's a door closing completely. It's a whole other, it's a whole opening up of possibilities that's gone. And whether whatever each one of us believes, there is still the social expectation that most women will have children. That is the social context in which we live. And of course Robin is struggling with that, because she knows that if that happens, then her career is mostly gone. But at the same time, not having that option is equally traumatic. It takes something away from how she sees herself.
And yet, I was really struck by Rob and Ellicott. I don't know if you can even call her spiritual, not religious. I mean, there's almost, she's open to there being a larger dimension to life, qua psychologist, but there's no, she's less religious than Rowling. Rowling says she goes to more church services than baptisms and weddings, or is it baptisms and funerals? What, Nick, you're the expert on this.
I think she said baptisms and weddings.
Okay.
Yeah.
Robin goes to baptisms and weddings.
That's more or less where we've seen her. Yeah.
But Rowling says she goes to more than that. Not Robin Ellicott, once she left school and there were chapel services or whatever, that left her life. And yet here's that feminist, that Artemis, saying that you're inhuman, at least, you're not a woman, at least, if you have this kind of experience and you're not shaken to the core by it. And she just marvels at Murphy's cluelessness and his just boneheadedness in the way he's talking to her about these things. There's a conflict there in Rowling's mind, I think, that's reflected in these characters.
And yet that didn't surprise me as much as other things in this book, shall we say. And I don't know whether that's a sort of gendered perspective here, but I got that, that made sense to me, even, not having experienced something like this, that I understood that, that felt right. That felt.
Yeah, and I'm going to go into the whole gender issues, whatever, but that it's in keeping with, her beliefs, her stands about women biologically having a unique perspective and identity that men aren't going to get. And here's Ryan Clueless Murphy standing in for the male sex. Just like, basically, I'm more than my eggs. I'm more than my eggs, Ryan. Really?
Yeah, even just on a very surface reading, Ryan was absolutely begging for a slap down at that moment, and
totally, yes.
And Robin was going to give it.
He was asking for it for sure.
Yeah.
I'll be there to support you, dear. Oh, really? Yeah. Are they going to scrape your ovaries for eggs? That's whew, ouch. Yeah. That was all right. On to other questions. Wow, that was fun. You said you've read Christmas Pig.
Yes,
Okay,
I've read Christmas. I actually read Christmas Book in preparation for your Viva because I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is the one I haven't read, and of course it's quite a short one, and easy to read.
Yeah.
And I reread it recently because I'm thinking about sort of Christmas and fantasy and all of that. And I'm also thinking about, I said, I'm writing this book on miniatures, and of course they shrink. There's this beginning scene, and I'm particularly interested in how authors navigate that. Especially when children shrink and they, you have the whole perspective changing. Yes, I mean
well,
it is a
here's my
gem of a
thesis.
story, isn't it? It is
Okay,
a little masterpiece.
my thesis is that Christmas Pig is going to be like um, Dickens's
Like Christmas Carol, right?
Christmas Carol, that or Tale of Two Cities. That
Mm,
you got. She writes these epic books, these 800, 900-page books,
yeah.
and you've got to put together a curriculum survey of 20th century, women literature, whatever, and you've got to have a representative book by the best-selling author who's a woman. What do you choose for them to
Yeah, well,
read that's reflects almost everything that Rowling does in a shorter volume?
yeah, yeah.
Well,
It's a good one for that, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, I
Mm.
mean, seriously, you get the Dante, you get the alchemy, you get the ring composition, you get the psychomachia. I mean, really, Christmas Pig is loaded, and you get the humor.
And you
I mean,
get the humor, you get the lightness of
Yeah.
it as well, that sense. And you also get I mean, you get the way that book gets the child's perspective and this idea of the favorite toy, which is not just a toy anymore. It's become uh, a thing of nearly flesh and blood and spirit and all that. It just does it beautifully, and it's so relatable. There's so many of these situations. I mean, I'm sure we've all had situations where our children lost their favorite thing, and you're running around the house trying to find it, and disaster strikes,
Yeah.
and you still know that this is like a piece of cloth or whatever it is. And it is, rationally, it is a replaceable thing, but it's not
Yeah.
a replaceable thing and never will. And it stands for all sorts of other things as well, doesn't it?
I
I had what the bits I'd forgotten with my recent reading. I remembered all the sort of the allegorical things like the bad habits and hope and love. And I think most of the first reading, what struck me most was the big twist where we think all the way through he's going for DP and he's going to come back with DP, and then it's not that at all. But also her understanding of the spiritualizing of material things. You start feeling very sad for the really tatty disposable things, and it's that connection with with humanity. It's a wonderful story. It really, really is. I'm surprised it hasn't been adapted yet. I'm surprised it hasn't been.
It's in production.
It is in production.
There's
I
Yeah,
was
there's
wondering. Yeah,
an animation is
there
in
you go.
production.
Yeah,
If you
yeah.
haven't listened to the all cast audio, full cast
Yes,
Ah,
audio,
yeah.
I mean
yeah,
that's
sadly.
magnificent. The As a Greek, you have to enjoy that she takes Saint Bernard from Dante and turns it into Saint Nicholas. I
Yes,
was like, okay, check that box.
absolutely.
I love that. Anyway, yeah, and really the Christian content in that story. That as a representative thing for everything Rowling does too, you also have the biographical element. You have the mixed families. You have the conflict
Yes, yeah,
between
yeah.
this, that.
The
And I
composite
was just
family
like,
for
wow,
sure.
just check this out. I mean, this, that.
Yeah.
I mean, I've written a whole stuff about the Christmas tree being the point of entry and exit, and really how
Yes,
she uses this. I
being
mean,
the
it's
portal.
Yeah.
yeah, this is such a magnificent work, and it's you can read it aloud in maybe two steps. Maybe your kids will fall asleep and you can pick up the next day and finish it off. I mean, it's a wonderful thing. But um, as a Rowling book, I read something you wrote, I think in 2015, earlier today, prepping for this, about Lewis Carroll. You wrote it on the 150th anniversary, I think, of
Oh
Alice or
yes,
something.
Alex. Yeah, yeah.
And you talked about how we all read out, or I think John Mark Reynolds in the United States said that Alice in Wonderland has become a book that everybody talks about and nobody has read.
Right. Yes, that's very
which
true.
is sad, But those of us who have read it and the Gardner annotated versions and struggled with it, or just read Nabokov. Nabokov is crazy about you. You read Pale Fire and it's Alice in Wonderland Part 2. But that world, you talked about it as being so common. It's the child talking to adults the way adults talk to children.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my gosh. So here I'm going through my I've got a whole shelf of Tolkien stuff that I haven't read, but it's all down there. And I'm marveling at it. And I think, wow, what if you want to think about Rowling as the marriage of Lewis Carroll, Charles Dodson, or his feminine, E. Nesbit, twin, or whatever, and Tolkien. You had this magisterial content, but with the humor and the madness of Alice, the Alice books.
With all the reversals and all the satirizing and absolutely.
I don't know if that work's been done. Dimitra, I'm going to ask you to do that.
Well,
I'm going to ask you to write the book about Rowling's the influence of Charles Dodson on the mad mathematician on Rowling's work, because
the problem with Alice is it's everywhere. It's a watershed moment in children's literature. It's impossible to not read Alice in nearly everything that's been written after Alice, because it's the first time really where you have the child perspective at the center of the book, and all of this. The child's perspective is what's important. Before that, you always have a sort of adult voice in many ways, either narrating or sort of moralizing or presenting things a certain way. And this is the book that reverses all of that. And it's also the book that says, I'm not writing to teach, I'm writing to entertain, which is, of course, when you're writing for children, you're always writing to teach, whether you want or not, because you're an adult and they're, you're a much more life experience sort of person, and they are still, being shaped. So there's always going to be an element of didacticism, whether you like it or not. But it's that urge, to escape that and sort of take the child's perspective. And I think Jack is a really good example of, of all the emotions and, all of the different sort of range of expectations for what a child's reactions would be. And at the same time, he is much more mature at the end, in many ways, that's been, there's nothing new about what I'm saying here, that all children's literature is about the process of growing up. It's all about the process of maturation. And that works quite nicely as well, especially I like the idea that, which actually happens more in contemporary fantasy, that the child comes back from the other world and they still remember it all. Right, it still shaped them in some way. So in earlier fantasies, or in some examples of fantasy, the child comes back and forgets everything, and that sort of defeats the purpose. What's the point of that? But he's clearly changed, and he's clearly wiser than his parents at the end, isn't
he? But his sister has been touched. That was the part that I liked. It was just like, but outside of Jack, you don't get Harry Potter without the Alice books, because it's all taught. It's all, Rowling famously, read Austen's Emma 20 times while writing Philosopher's Stone. And when you read Emma and read Harry Potter, you're like, oh, because it's that third person limited omniscient thing. That's a hard perspective to write from, because it's, you're over that character's head. So you have some facade of objectivity, and yet you're only with that what that person is seeing and how they neglect or misunderstand it or whatever. And it's a brilliant thing. It's very difficult in first or third universal. It is limited omniscient allows you to set up the big twist at the end and that sort of thing if you know how to do it. And Rowling does it from the perspective of a child in Harry Potter and Christmas Pig, which is Alice.
Yeah.
That's a oh well, I'm intrigued. And of course, Nick, put that on my list of projects that I'll never get to.
there comes a point where you'll just have to make a list of things that you know you're never going to get to
Yeah.
do.
Well,
But it's fine,
I'm
you know.
going to say I have evidence now. I said, Dimitra, Fimi, this is something that you started. You should do this. This is not John's job. I don't do that. All right. Wow, we're getting to the end of our list here. This is terrible. Yeah, I'm gonna go back. This is a ring. We do everything by ring, Dimitra. This is we started
That's
off
fine.
by talking.
That's fine.
We started talking
true.
off about
Form and content come together, right?
We're going to talk about your being a Greek. My perspective on writing is largely that of the perennialists like Kumaraswamy and that crew. That or Iliade, that myths serve in a profane culture. Myth serves a religious or a mythic function. I mean, story serves a religious or mythic function. To include movies and any kind of narrative like that. It's because in our world today, where religion has become, in some sense, obsolescent, and yet the person still has this noetic capacity in their imaginations that just needs oxygen. It's their heart. The best writers, or the most popular writers, are the people that serve that function, that deliver content that has supernatural or contranatural reference that are the real. That scene you talked about at King's Cross. I love the fact that she said in an interview that I thought the name worked rather well. I'm just like, oh, okay. Yeah. Anyway, and of course the interviewer, whew, not a follow-up question at all. I'm just like, oh man, there it is. She handed it to you. To me, it's no accident that one of the leaders in fantasy fiction, being the woman I'm talking to now, is a Greek, because there's Greece is like the remnant spot through its orthodox and mythological heritage, which really is a dynamic thing. It's a presence in Greece. Where you grew up in Salamis. I mean, come on. I mean, that's like my wife grew up in Istanbul, and she talks about touring Hagia Sophia as effectively an atheist. Her parents didn't go to church, nothing like that. Her father was a Harvard PhD in engineering, and he recommended his children read the Bible because it's referred to in literature. And yet every time there was a guest, my wife and her mother would go off and they would walk around Hagia Sophia.
Which I still haven't done, because every time we try to plan it, the advice is from the Greek government is it's dangerous, don't go. Anyway, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah. Well, it's a mosque now again. I mean, it's
I know
pretty dicey. But anyway, just walking through that building, especially when the iconography was visible, she talked about just having dreams where things that she had until she became Orthodox. All of a sudden, these dreams that she remembers from her childhood that were coming to her through that influence. And to grow up in Greece with an iconographic presence, even the agnostic in Greek is exposed to iconography.
Yeah, the iconography is everywhere. Yeah.
So that bleeds into, I think, to me, again, this is the John school of fantasy literature, is that you have to read it iconographically. You have to understand it as basically the imagination is this, again, this nous, this noetic capacity that is able to have contact with reference through art. And that perspective is very different than, especially now in the academy, which is largely political and has entirely different concerns. Even when they talk about structure, they don't talk about structure in terms of like what chiasmus means. Why every revealed tradition scriptures are written chiastically, which means that it has to have an iconographic component. It has to be some sort of experience of that center, which is your center. Do you think that's my first question to you was, how do you get from Greece to Wales to be one of the preeminent Tolkien scholars? To me, that's a straight line.
Mm.
To me, that's, of course you go to Wales. It's a mythic country. It's a mythological country. Does Wales even exist as a country? I mean, it used to be a rugby country, but now, I mean, that's
John,
Don't go there.
we have no-go areas of discussion, as you know.
Well, I'm glad the Japanese exist, Nick. Another reason to love the Japanese, right, is they play rugby against Wales. Anyway, that you go from Greece to Wales, and then you climb to the Mount Olympus of Tolkien studies, to me is because of what you have by nature almost, is that capacity to perceive the what's beneath and behind and within things that a myth calls you to. You can't. Northrop Frye in Anatomy of Criticism talks about the spectrum of literature, and he says there's realism and then there's myth, and that literature is in between those two. You've got to have enough realism so the person can be engaged. The imagination isn't saying, really, flying mice, but that you got to have enough realism so you're engaged, and for the mythic content then to come through it.
Yeah.
When you grow up in a culture that's all about that mythic content and understands it's not realistic, but that it's of course it's in your head, but it's not. Why would you think it's not real? Because that is what's most real. Do you think that's an important thing for people to try to gain, which you had from your mother's milk? Is that something that has helped you? Is it something that you can share with others? I mean,
it definitely has. As I was saying, going back full circle to the beginning, I think it was me recognizing mythical things in Tolkien when I first, fell into the Lord of the Rings sort of by mistake. And as you say, the iconography, both the classical iconography, which is everywhere, you still go around and there are not just sort of recognized sites, but we used to play archaeologists when I was little in my island, because there's a hill at the back of the house where there was a prehistoric settlement, so we'd just dig and find little bits of pottery, etc. And I was telling my dad, we need to tell the museum. My dad said, yeah, I've told them. They have about 100,000 samples of this. They don't need any more. Just play, it's fine. So we do our little exhibitions and all that. So yeah, definitely this sense that there's layers of the past, that there's layers of of story, that there's layers of icons. And yes, of course, I grew up in an island which is, I suppose, more I didn't grow up in an urban environment where it was a small community. The church was a big part of everybody's life, and the Greek Orthodox iconography is very striking, and it's very much part of that experience. This idea of the icon as the book of the illiterate, right? That it's a way of sort of teaching these narratives and learning from them. So there's definitely a line. There's definitely a line there, and I think at times, I mean, it's difficult to say anything like this and not sound. I don't sound presumptuous or arrogant in any way, but
that's John's job.
Go ahead, Dimitra.
But there are moments where I'm thinking, I think I understand what Tolkien is doing here as part of his, as part of his faith, as part of, somebody who read the classics, as well as somebody, who had that combination of experiences that are a bit unusual, I suppose, in our world at the moment.
The whole coal biters phenomenon of that study of Norse myth so informs everything that he does.
Yeah. And classical, we forget that, one of the books that you didn't mention, of course you didn't mention because it's in Greek, but there's the one book we've done on Tolkien in the Greek language, and I feel a bit ambassadorial about it, but it's this one, and it's got Bilbo and Odysseus, and you can see what's his name, there's a cyclops there, and there's all sorts of things. And that was the book where we actually translated scholarship on Tolkien and his classical sources. So there's definitely an Oedipus story in the Turin Turambar tale, There's definitely Odyssey elements, all over the place in the Silmarillion, even in the Hobbit. That the Catabasis sort of element of going to the underworld, shape shifting, all sorts of things. So Tolkien started as a classics major. He changed in the middle into English, but he started doing classics, as most people in Oxford would have done at the time. So yeah, all of these things are coming together, and then the same is true of C.S. Lewis, and that's another little link that I wanted to bring up, and it hasn't come up in the discussion yet between J.K. Rowling and that school. It's the C.S. Lewis sort of all in the sync approach. It's fine to have a bit of Norse and a bit of classical and a bit of work, and bring it all together, and that sort of works, in a way that in theory it shouldn't work, but it does work.
I thought Tolkien hated that about Lewis.
He did hate that. He absolutely did. But at that point, Tolkien had spent 40 years building a coherent world. I think if you go to his early stuff, it's not that different to that. His early stuff is much more mixed and flowery and different to what Tolkien worked for such a long time that he has phases in his writing. There's the very early stuff is very different. There's fairies rather than elves, and much more, botanical stuff and light-hearted stuff. Yeah. So yeah, I think I'm I've come from a good sort of tradition, I suppose, to engage with all of this, and with I was very lucky at Cardiff when I was doing my early Celtic Studies Masters. One of the people who taught me is Dr. Juliet Wood, who was then the president of the Folklore Society, and she's one of the authorities in folklore studies. So I had some really, really good tutors, and it all came together, because sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes these things, there's a lot of misinformation out there as well about myth. There's a lot of yeah, there's a lot of myth about myth.
You just highlighted the use of myth. Myth is now used as, if someone says that's a myth, I mean that's a popularly understood lie.
Yeah,
it's not true. And then the famous conversion story about Tolkien saying this is a true myth. He simply means it's an historical myth, because all myth is true. I mean, it's just not. Is it in your head? Why would you think it's not real? I mean, that myth is real. It may not be true in terms of an historical, time and space understanding of events, but it's true. That's why these stories survive.
That's why I like the Ursula Le Guin has a nice phrase about fantasy, that fantasy is not factual, but it's true. And I like that distinction. It's not the factual, but there is a truth that goes beyond the factual, isn't there? So, yeah.
I look at your work, and especially when you come up with things that I'm just doing the sisters from the Cupid and Psyche myth, and I thought I had that. I thought I had that with Ilsa and the sisterhood.
We can't all have everything, though. I've learned stuff from you two the last few months, where I've been listening to everything. The whole point is to be open and to keep on exploring and not get stuck in a certain set of ideas. You've been open to all sorts of things, and I'm learning as much as other people are learning from me. I learn from my students every time. It's a collaborative thing.
Well, now that you're here, now that you're part of Rowling Studies, we're going to be touching
now you
base.
Can claim me.
We're going to be touching base with you about things. You just mentioned the going to hell meme, whatever, in fantasy literature from basically Homer forward, especially Virgil, Dante, etc. That I think we're going to, and we see it in Christmas Big. We're also going to see it, I think, because we haven't quite. I mean, Robin's been living in hell, it seems, for the last 4 books, but I think this next book we're going to have that she goes to hell.
Into hell. Yeah, that's what worries me a lot. But let's see.
that was my first thought when she says, "Well, here's this picture of Cupid and Psyche ascendant." I'm like, oh,
not sure about that. Yep.
That's just like, well, everybody was kind of high-fiving each other on that, and I was like, Well, you know what has to come before that? You know, this is sort of like, you know, there's no Pascha without a Holy Friday. You know, this is sort
Exactly.
of
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
this is like, you know, she has to be crucified first before we get
Mm.
this resurrection. And
Mm.
we'll see. I mean, frankly, how much more can this woman be crucified? I mean, this woman has
Well,
been,
that's
you
the
know,
thing. That's the thing. Yeah, yeah. I'm working on a piece of them. Actually, I might release it now, since we've done all this discussion. I might release it on my Substack at some point. I did the only paper I've done on Rowling, which was like a few years ago. Gosh, I was still in Cardiff, so it's more than just a few years ago. It's a longer time ago. And it was a folklore society conference on fantasy and folklore, and it was actually on Tales of Beetle the Bard. So I probably need to get that out there for people to see and tell me how wrong I am on all sorts of things. But it was
you know, we'll have to have you back to talk about Tales of Beetle the Bard, because
Mhm.
I just realized when you mentioned it, wow, this woman's written a folk tale. She's written a
Yeah,
book of myths.
she's
You
written
know, I'm just
exactly
like,
Yeah,
exactly the point I'm making there. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly that. And also I'm trying to trace what folklore motifs are there and why,
yeah.
and how are these stories working inside the fictional world. So yeah, that was a lovely conference. It was organized by Bill Gray, who's now, he's left us now. So it's going to be probably in his memory as well, because it was a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I have done nothing with it. I've given it as a lecture, but I haven't published it. So I'm probably going to upload it. Yeah, that
all
you
right.
put me in the mood now. That's it. This is all your fault, you two.
Uh, well, no,
Everyone,
I'm claiming I'm claiming responsibility. You blame me all you want. You know, wave the flags, point to me. John made me
everyone,
do this.
everyone, don't forget, please subscribe to Dimitra's Substack if you want to see that wonderful article. I can thoroughly recommend it.
There's a lot of children's literature there, but yes, yeah, as long as you're aware of that. A lot of
Well,
Tolkien.
also, if you go back into her archives, you can hear her sing, which is,
Oh,
Dimitri, you have a beautiful voice. That
thank
was
you.
that. My wife, that Substack you did in tribute to a Greek artist I'd never even heard of. Forgive me. Um,
Yeah.
I looked up all of his things. I spent, it was a rabbit hole. A morning of my life was spent, who is this person? This is fascinating.
He
Dimitri
was a
knows this
very,
person.
I think you'd be quite interested in him, John, with it. He does all sorts of interesting mythical things. He also started as, he changed his views a lot throughout his life, ended up being, yeah, so started as very much, part of a socialist movement, and, was sort of tortured during the dictatorship and all of that. But he ended up in a different place, and very much closer to the Greek Orthodox Church, for example. So very interesting life journey there. And his funeral, which was a couple of weeks ago, was a huge public thing. A lot of people sort of flocked. But he represents a whole generation. I remember listening to his work from when I was very young. But yeah, I was trained, as I did quite a lot of singing as a young person, and I still like it, but there's no time to do it semi-professionally anymore.
Well,
There's
we're going
too
to
much
have you on, and
work.
you're going to sing, tales, songs from Tolkien. You're gonna give us the.
I've done that, but they are under copyright, and you're not supposed to do it public. Tolkien wrote the songs for the philologist, which are based on all sorts of interesting things. Some of them in English, some of them in like Gothic or, other languages. And we've done a little performance of those, but they are in a weird copyright situation, so I can't release any of that.
Oh well, we're
Mm.
we invite lawsuits here at Harvard Professor.
Are you sure the Tolkien estate?
Oh,
I'm
John,
not sure you want
absolutely.
John,
this.
we've spoken about this.
You
You know,
certainly don't want to
I
do this, not with that lot.
seriously, what better publicity could we have than to have the Tolkien estate come after us? When I first wrote
I've
my book,
worked for years to have a good relationship with the Tolkien estate. I can't
oh,
jeopardize it.
well, maybe you shouldn't have come on the show, Dimitra. This is an error in judgment on your part. This practical wisdom here,
Mm.
prudence. All right,
What
Dimitra, we've already gone
what
over time. We asked you to come on for a couple of hours. We've already gone over the time. This could go on for 6 or 7 hours. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your work.
Thanks for having me.
And forgive me, but I hope this is the first of repeated visits with us, especially as you rejoin the world of Rowling studies.
I'll do my best. I'll do my best. Thank you so much. It's been really, really fun. It's been really fun. Thank you very much for having me, and
thank
continue doing what you're doing, because I'm enjoying all of that as well. So
Thank you, Dimitra. It's been an
diolch yn
absolute
fawr
joy.
iawn.
Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch.
What was that?
There you go.
Salute.
All right then.